Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kind of Fruity podcast. I'm Misfit.
I'm Brenna.
And I am Pepper Coyote. Hello, hello.
Hey, check it out. We got ourselves an extra voice here today.
That's right. Now you have to deal with this.
Yeah, we had a little bit of fun doing setup, but we seem to have gotten it all to work. So, there's been a little bit going on in the news. It's all kind of dull, but one thing that has happened recently is everyone's gotten a little bit more familiar with the wonderful shit posts of a certain Twitter account named Drill, as Elon Musk has successfully been turning himself into a corn cob slowly over the last few weeks.
I am not reluctant to jump into the thing for any, at first it doesn't matter my opinion of Elon Musk, but it's not exactly a positive one, and it hasn't been for a long time. But I am always dubiously cautious when people want to celebrate him losing money. It's like, guys, he's the best guy in America at getting a bunch of money. Somehow this will still end up making him money until it's proven otherwise to me.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Honestly, my thoughts on it are because apparently the Tesla stock has been falling pretty significantly. It's down to just over $100 a share at the moment, ever since he's taken control of Twitter. It'd be hard-pressed not to write this off as basically just a tax write-off or something, that he's made a lot of losses in his Tesla stock, so he could potentially recoup the essential losses that he made in just buying Twitter.
Stock prices are such a phony indication of value anyway. We watched the just a few weeks ago, when it also related to the Elon Musk Twitter purchase, when we had the what is that, the pharma corporation that someone made a fake account and tweeted out, insulin is now free, and that company's like, oh look, see, its stock prices are tanking. It was higher than when it was beforehand, not even a week later, but that never ends up in the as the goof headline.
Yup. Do you have any thoughts on that one, Hen?
Honestly, no. I'm sorry, this might be a harsh take, but I really don't care what Elon Musk is up to. It might be bad, but
I mean, to be perfectly fair, in a lot of ways, the average experience for any day-to-day user of Twitter hasn't really changed all that much, or at least in my opinion.
I mean, he's probably not getting banned or something for saying something stupid now.
I continue to watch the lengthy procession of people, quote, leaving Twitter that's now entering its second month. The only reason I hear about any of this crap is because of that. I also don't really care about Elon Musk's activities. I think that Twitter will continue to serve the same purpose for capital that it always has. It will maintain its position as a tool for getting random people to scream at each other. And until some other platform that fits the exact same kind of need, people talk about, oh well, MySpace went to Facebook, but yeah, it's because Facebook served the functions that people wanted to use MySpace for better and more efficiently and in wider spread form. Unless some new throw your opinions out live blog at the entire world app comes out to supplant Twitter, it's just gonna be Twitter for a bit. No matter where the stock price goes, because as we all acknowledge in situations outside of Twitter, stock prices are all kind of made up and fake.
Believe it or not, there is sort of one. It's called Co-host.
Oh yeah, that's one that you started using a little bit.
Well, I haven't used it, but I have an account over there because I had a friend who decided to try this thing when the whole scare of Twitter going down or something happened. And so, they told me about it, and it's not exactly like Twitter, but that might be a good thing.
That was also a thing that a lot of people found out with Mastodon, was kind of one of the biggest ones that even a lot of furries have jumped on board with, is that while it is more or less intended to serve a similar function to Twitter in terms of connecting with your friends and promoting whatever project that you're on. Basically, I only really use my Twitter for halfway promoting this podcast, or the couple of times I've guested on OV, that I would promote those episodes. Or if something interesting goes on, then yeah, I'll share it and retweet, but I'm not super invested in Twitter. A lot of people's experiences with Mastodon are as it tends to go with with some open source programs. Basically that everything is not as automated as you're used to. So once the sort of frustration factor hits a certain point, they're going to stop using it and go back to what they know. Even if it's into the hands of like a arguably worse platform in some ways.
I have already had people ask, like, I made a Mastodon account like a few years ago. I don't remember what was happening at the time, but I'm like, all right, a thing, people might use it. Let's get my username before anybody else can. And since then, people have asked me, what are you on Mastodon? And I'm like, I'm this guy, and I'm Pepper Coyote. And they'll say, oh, what server? And I'm like, what? I have no idea. Like, I don't know, I'm just on there. You can't, like, oh yeah, you can't just like globally search for things. It's all cordoned off, which is a positive in some respects, but also the reason people use Twitter is to look at what every asshole in the world is saying about something. And if you can't do that, then they aren't going to go. If you can't do that on Mastodon, then you aren't going to go to Mastodon to look for that. And also the amount of the institutional support that Twitter has, the fact that every institution has kind of like agreed that that's the place, is what gives it its power as a platform. In the same way that like, it's like, how would you start a new Google? How would you start a new YouTube? How would you start a new Twitter? You would have to have enough capital investment that you have to do like Epic Games style, like jump in and be like, we're going to give people, I don't know what, exclusive contracts to leave Twitter and come to Flitter. Like just the idea of a very similar platform overtaking it, unless it is just demonstrably better in a whole ton of ways, where Mastodon is kind of a like technological, it's a step kind of backwards. It's closer to a forum type situation. Yeah, that's why I see Twitter continuing to exist. Just they'll make, I guess, a little less ad money, but they were already not making money before Musk bought it.
Yeah, that was one of his big things that he was pushing about it, is that when he was buying it, he'd want to, I guess, reformat how the company operated, because when he bought it, it was in a case where I guess it was losing a ton of money by the day, just for essentially keeping the lights on, which I'm not sure how that's all working or anything. I don't know how Twitter operates. I'm just the end user, essentially. But one thing I do find kind of fun is one of the couple small changes that everyone's going to say Elon made them, but obviously no, it's the team of programmers. He just sort of like, yeah, this would be kind of neat. So now we've got like the little view counter on whatever your tweet is, which I guess is supposed to be handy somehow. But the thing I actually like right now is a lot of the corporate and brand accounts, they've got a fucking square profile pic, which just for me makes it so much easier to determine, okay, I know exactly what I'm blocking right now. Get a few less ads.
I've noticed an increased frequency of ads I see on Twitter. I'm kind of like you, where I know it's designed kind of like a slot machine to like suck you in and like work on all of your psychological cues. That like the view counter is kind of sort of probably part of that, or an attempt to get people still looking at the thing. It is interesting seeing where it'll be like, wow, 4,000 views and 10 likes, which is interesting. But I'm trying to use it for only advertising and, I don't know, uncontroversial posts, if that makes sense. Either just like happy fun time pictures, hooray, or the most uncontroversial takes possible. But it's hard not to get sucked into these conversations. Just today, it's like, this person has a bad opinion, and then, but I don't see the bad opinion tweet. I see the quote retweet of a quote retweet, and it's like, look at their profile picture. It says they're only 16, and I'm like, guys, should our reaction to finding out someone with a bad opinion is 16 to dunk on them even harder? They're a minor? Like, is this the kind of like brain space Twitter puts you into? It's like, we've detected weakness. They've admitted that they are a child. Kill.
Well, they're not really even as much getting like truly dunked on until they've got that one person just commenting nothing but ratio on their tweet and getting literally one like on it. That's when you know you fucked up.
People using Twitter for its intended purposes, so you can't. Well, I can fault individuals, but it's like, oh, you went to the racetrack and went really fast. Like, you went to Twitter and were an asshole. Who knows?
That actually reminds me of something that I see that I even like. I enjoy seeing it anytime like some like really stupid tweet happens. this animator dude created this animation, and occasionally you see it at the people posting the video link to this. I'll just post it in here real quick. I love seeing that for some reason. That's become my favorite thing to see.
Oh
when
yes,
you see
that
a really,
one.
when you really see a an actual stupid tweet. And you see somebody who, and it's either they actually mean it or they're just sending that to be whatever. It's like, yes, keep spreading this song because I like this song. I don't care whether it's actually relevant to the tweet. I like this song. I'll watch this video again just because it's there.
So, in other news, the government passed its new budget for the next year of $1.7 trillion, including about $70 billion in aid for Ukraine through various means. A lot of which will totally not get funded through Raytheon and Lockheed and all the arms manufacturers, but you know, we'll have the faith that apparently it's going to go where it needs to be. Wink.
It's like not horribly long ago, this is an acronym, the cigar reports came out about Afghanistan when we left there, showing, all right, this amount of money was allocated for this project, and here is what actually happened, and just more often, not even just more often than not, like 90% of the time, it's like, all right, there was $1 billion to make a school, and what actually got made, it's like there was a foundation poured, and that's it. And then we sent another $5 billion, and nothing else got built. And like, I could be completely wrong, but I would not be shocked if in a few years you get a similar kind of report where it's like, wow, we sent $70 billion to this country, and none of it did any of the things that we thought we were doing. It turned out it just fed the black market, and that money went directly. Even calling it aid to Ukraine is a misnomer, because like you just said, it's aid to Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and other like finance capital interests who make money off of there being a longer war.
Mm-hmm. And can you guess what the biggest line item part of that budget would be, Pepper?
I say, is that like the entire budget including defense, or is this separate from the defense spending?
I believe it's including defense, because what I'm reading right now is a little article from The Hill. $858 billion on defense programs, so a good, like, I'd say over 50% of it.
The silliest part of that number is you'll see headlines where it's like the Biden is rebuked by Congress, because apparently Biden's proposed budget was $45 billion less, and then all of the quote progressives voted to they wanted the specific programs where there was a nuclear sub thing of like, we want to, from a sub nuclear warhead, we want to make one a better. I thought we already had submarines that could launch nukes, but I don't know. They apparently want a newer, better way to shoot a nuke out of a submarine, and they're keeping that program going. Same thing with whatever that F number jet is that even the military says is bad and we should stop working on. They're gonna keep funding that again because whatever town it gets made in, I'm sure that guy's congressman had to make it happen now.
That sounds like a whole lot of work for a whole lot of nothing.
Another fun thing about it is there's an additional $772 billion on non-defense spending. So I'm assuming that's like just government as a whole, and just the remainder of what's not in like specific grants or any sort of earmarks in there. It does specifically cite non-defense, non-veterans related programs. So I'm assuming it's not specifically military related and probably just part of the regular budgets. So either way, both represent a increase over like the previous year's budgets.
This isn't really I don't know if this adds anything, but a thing I like to keep in mind whenever I'm hearing about these numbers and budgets is, remember, even if these budget items were listed for things that we all like and are happy that money is being spent on, the way things operate in the US, that money must first go through some third-party company that's going to suck up all of it. Like locally here in Phoenix, we have Valley Metro. And we'll complain about how our public transit just isn't very robust. Our buses run like every 45 minutes, and there's one route for every bus stop. There's no the downtown line. There's no express things. So people don't use public transit because it takes freaking forever. It takes me 25 minutes with zero traffic to get from my house to the airport. It takes 2.5 hours on public transit. Like, there's no reason it should be like that. Why is it like that? Well, the independent private capitalist company that runs all of our stuff, Valley Metro, only makes money when they're building things. So if you build if you build something that works really well and then you're done, you don't make any more money. So like the entire incentive structure is for them to build crappy things that break down all the time so they just built the Tempe town car. That's not the right thing. Monorail, whatever, but they built it like the tracks are lower than the rest of the ground around it, so anytime it rains, I mean, it's Phoenix, but it does rain sometimes, the electrified tracks are flood like under an inch of water, and you're like, you just built this. Are there no engineers that work for Valley Metro? So even if there's positive spending, it has to be filtered through these bloodthirsty companies that only exist to siphon off public money, these freaking tax leeches. So it's hard for me to have any positive feelings about a federal budget coming out of this mode of production.
Exactly. Like, even for us up here in Green Bay, when I was younger and much more naive, I was sort of surprised to find out that the buses are federally funded. We've got buses that go through like every half hour, except for on Saturdays, which are every hour. Every year or so, they're always putting in new bus stops or taking out old ones, which I always thought was strange. And then looking that kind of stuff up, it's like, oh yeah, that's why they're doing it. It's because they have to use up all of their budget. Otherwise, they're not going to be allotted the same amount of budget next year, or other more nefarious reasons. It's kind of why also in Green Bay, for a while, as part of the highway budgets that would come from the state level, Green Bay was always tearing out the medians in the larger roads, only to replace them next year, just to have essentially busy work. Meanwhile, there's a bunch of side roads and streets that have not been repaired or resurfaced in over 20, 30 plus years.
If we're forced to have everything that happens in like the public sphere, everything that happens with all this funding, at least, take place on a free market, this is just what you end up with, because that's the product of like lowest bidder mentality, various construction companies trying to get contracts. Like the goal is never actually build a more efficient public transit system, because that's not a thing our market is equipped to do. It'd be like trying to play an Atari game on a freaking Dreamcast. It just is not made to do that. What it is made to do is generate capital. So the activities you describe are ones that generate capital for various middlemen and individual private companies, but do not result in increased public transit efficiency. Yeah.
I mean, I think this is recently, but when I first moved up here to Green Bay, before my husband and I got married, Saturday was great, because Saturday was like free bus day. Like, you didn't have to pay to get on the bus. I mean, yeah, it ran every hour rather than every half hour, but you don't have a car, you need to go downtown. And get groceries. Saturday was the best day to do that. But if I'm not mistaken, I think they took that away from us.
Mm-hmm. So in 2020, with the COVID restrictions, buses stopped running in May. They resumed like limited service in August, but then after that, because they were still running them free because people still had to get to work and all that. But the following January, they not only put the fares back into effect, they also increased the fares, but they kept the same scheduling, so that was neat. And also they took away the free buses on Saturday. So not only do you have to pay for those again, they also still run with the reduced schedule and like the increased prices. So $2 for each ride that you take on the bus, which, yeah, it doesn't sound like a lot to a lot of people, but if you're just like working class, then yeah, that $2 is going to be hit, especially if you have to take multiple buses to get to where you got to go.
I hate that these kinds of conversations, like if I, from the word go, certain people who've been led down certain ideological paths will just assume that, oh, Pepper is a conspiracy theorist or like a COVID denier of some kind or anti-vax, whatever label they're going to throw at me. But there have been blatant measures that we can see that are using COVID as an excuse to do some underhanded stuff that they were going to do anyway. What you just described would be one of those. Oh, we have COVID, so we have to take away this public service. Oh, it's just going to not come back now. We're doing that with, what is it, Title 42, where all land-bound entrance to the southern border can't come in because COVID, unless they're Ukrainian. Then they get a fast track and they're in here in a week. But if you're in an airplane, you can still come. So, like, terrestrial Mexicans may not enter the country, but airbound Mexicans are fine. See, something about flying over the border removes all the COVID from your body. And like everybody looking at that's like, oh, they just don't want to let in Mexicans in the country, right? Like that's what it's about. And I'm saying Mexicans, really, usually it's like Hondurans and Guatemala. They don't want anybody coming in through the southern border who is a certain level of brown. Basically. And COVID is so obviously being used as an excuse to do that thing they want to do anyway. But if you say that, you're called a conspiracy theorist and a COVID denier. And it's like, if you believe that is possible for this, is it not also possible for other things, such as when only small businesses, for the most part, were forced to close down through all of COVID, and then suspiciously all of these large businesses that got to stay open through COVID made a ton of money?
Yeah. There's a lot of small bars in the Green Bay area that have never reopened ever since COVID because, like, a lot of them are running on such a razor-thin budget that they couldn't really afford to be closed down for a month, let alone even a week in reality, because they're just like the literal mom-and-pop shop, essentially. But then occasionally you run into the cases where some of the more larger, even like semi-franchise grocery chains and stuff have ended up shutting down. There's one that we had up here called Austin's, which they started out as like a little mom and pop company that eventually grew to be like a big part of Green Bay. But because they just sort of stayed essentially independent, they never really signed on with Kroger or any of the other big mega brands. They were eventually just sort of getting price out of everything. Then when COVID happened, the majority of the restrictions made it almost impossible for them to continue.
So while everyone here acknowledges and would agree that the U.S. government, various states, blah, 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 did not do everything they either could have or definitely should have to prevent COVID, right? Like that's a non-controversial opinion.
Oh yeah, I think so.
So if you were to intentionally, like if you were an evil supervillain or you're playing Sim City and it's with America and you wanted to find a way through regulations to funnel money directly to Amazon, how would you go about, like, what restrictions would you put in place? Because I argue it is exactly what was put in place during COVID.
In a lot of ways, yeah. Because like with specifically DoorDash and Uber Eats and all that, everyone got very fucking familiar with them over the course of the pandemic. Everybody started turning to those, even though, you know, you get like big markups and stuff. Like I've ordered McDonald's or other fast food from them, and it's like you see what would normally be the dollar menu or whatever at certain shops getting charged like $3 or $4 just because you get that markup, which is like, okay, I understand. This company wants to make a little bit of a profit off of that. Fine, I accept that. But then you see like the level of those markups, and that literally in the grand scheme of things, none of that goes back to the people who are actually doing the work in the form of the delivery drivers and everything. And then you start to kind of see it being as just another one of those cases where this system is kind of fucked for just anyone who's like working class of any form.
This is an appropriate time to throw in one of my thing. I didn't give myself any kind of introduction. Hi, I am Pepper Coyote, and my goal when I enter these kinds of when I enter any discourse, my goal, it's not even saying goal because it makes it sound like I have some kind of like agenda where I'm just driving towards my ideology no matter what, because it's not that. But I spent the pandemic reading Marx and Lenin, and I've been getting into Marxism. I am in no way an expert or authority on Marx or Marxism. I'm kind of like Like there are actual astronomers, and then there's like the guy who gets a kind of nice telescope and starts looking at stuff in his backyard. Like that's me with the science that is socialism. I am an enthusiastic hobbyist, but do not take my words with any kind of authority, which, hey, if you read a lot of Marx, that's a Marxian thing to say.
Since you've said that, this would be actually a really good segue into that. Politics is a pretty controversial thing for a lot of people. I'll just go out and say, like, this isn't trying to convert or whatever anybody. Like, the whole point of this podcast is just sort of information more than anything. Like, we all have our individual beliefs and what sort of brainworms we subscribe to. But I figured that since it's a controversial topic, I figured we need to get a neutral, fair, and balanced opinion from somebody who's never known for political controversy.
So when I say that Marxism is politically neutral, what I mean is, if you're doing it right, socialism with a capital S is a scientific method, or at least is a scientific field of study. So one's morality is not necessary. Like, you don't have to have a certain morality or ideology in order for Marxism to be, quote, true. The idea is that these are using the scientific process and acknowledging science. I know it sounds so vague, and I'm sorry. What decisions can we make? Could we make? Like, as a species that governs itself. You don't have to agree with everything that, like, Thomas Edison said, believed, whatever, in order to acknowledge electrical theories, right? You should not have to have any certain ideology or belief system for Marxism to make sense, because the things pointed out by it are, like, factually true, and you can study them, and there's evidence, and that's, like, the whole point, as opposed to, I don't know, republicanism, democratism, where like what you believe seems to shift day to day. Like, before, the Democrats were the party of, bring immigration, let in the immigrants, and now since Biden took over, it's like we have stopped the immigrants from it's like, things just seem to flip-flop back and forth, because the morality doesn't, like, that's just thrown up as a smoke screen. Where the goal of Marxism, scientific socialism, is to deal with factual reality. So why am I saying this now? You were just talking about one of the main contradictions of capitalism as a system, not in a way that I don't like it because I personally find it abhorrent and mean and immoral, which I may or may not. But, factual contradictions that you are quantifiable. So you were talking about how Uber Eats drivers and other type, like, COVID-friendly, companies thrived during the pandemic, but the individual workers did not receive that value. That would be the primary contradiction of capitalism, which is the socialization of production, but the feudal appropriation of profit and product. We make all this shit as a team. The Uber Eats squad is out there as a team, even though they aren't treated with any kind of respect, as a team of hundreds, thousands of workers, laborers out there doing a thing. And then where does all the money go? Well, it is given to your feudal lord called a CEO, who then decides, as God King, who gets how much of that profit and product.
That's pretty much the joke that I use all the time at work is when I get a customer who's coming through the line rightfully complaining about how much our prices have gone up, I will just sort of not bullshit them. I say, oh yeah, sorry about that. Our CEO needs to buy their third yacht. And that usually gets a laugh out of them.
You start, like, that's the kind of viewpoint you'll have before you get in any way educated on any of this. You'll be like, man, people are just raising prices to screw us over because they can. And you'll be told, someone will be like, oh, well, come on, there's more nuance. There's supply and demand and all these mechanisms of the economy. And then you get into it and you study, and then you come right back to, man, they're just raising prices to screw us over because they can, because that's just what happens.
Both can be true.
Yeah, you can find a lot of economic justifications for this contradiction, but until, like, that's one of the things that socialism hopes to solve, because that is a contradiction, right? You can never have peace and harmony in an economic system where hundreds of thousands of people get together to produce, to make things, and then one or two guys or a board of directors. I hate taking it to individuals because each individual rich person doesn't really matter. You could replace every single mean, black-hearted Grinch rich person with a nice, shiny, cool rich person. And as long as production is socialized, but profit is allocated feudally, as in like just arbitrarily, some people get a bunch of money, some people don't, and it is in no way based on their contribution to creating the product, that contradiction will reproduce itself in the form of like oppression and rent seeking and an inevitable underclass, like over and over, regardless of which individuals are running things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's one thing too. I think a lot of people have come to realize over the last couple of years, like the people that just aren't completely behind the sort of team sports mentality of like, well, they're the Democrats, so we're still going to support them. But like, I think the Biden administration as a whole was pretty much a pretty big awakening for a lot of the Diet Coke left of, hey, maybe the Democrats aren't actually the active harm reduction that we thought they were, insofar as like even Biden himself said in one of his campaign speeches, if he was elected president, nothing would fundamentally change. In the grand scheme of things, not too much has really changed. There's been a little bit more move towards maybe better policies, but there hasn't been any sort of fundamental transformation of anything from the most progressive president in American history that everybody's come to expect.
We have seen very recently what side of this debate, conflict, that neither Democrats nor Republicans ever propose any kind of change in the arrangement of ownership. Because if you take what I just said to be true, which you don't have to do on belief or faith or dogma or ideology, is like there are charts and graphs and tables to prove that what I like, that concept I just threw out there, is definitely true, and definitely how like, people don't even deny that. It's like, yeah, 100 people work at our factory and one guy decides how much each of us get paid. How many thousands of Uber Eats drivers are there? But like one or two guys, really it's a machine robot at this point that goes, here is the exact amount of profit you should disperse to your cretins to keep them living, and here's how much you should do. Like humans aren't even necessarily making these decisions. They put it into a theorem or into an equation and then just kind of like throw stuff around, not arbitrarily, but for the purpose of generating more and more capital. Oh crap, I lost exactly where I was going with it. What were we talking about? Oh, so you see Biden revealing whose interests he represents. So there's the appropriators, the people who like decide who gets what money. We call them the owning class, the bourgeois. And then there's the social production people. That's us. We all, at least most of us, we all probably work for some kind of company that makes some kind of profit, some kind of product. Well, we had a railway strike in which we saw that the very, very different Democrats and Republicans, who are in no way just like two different brands of the same economic system, they both squatted up together and said, okay, rail unions, if you don't accept this deal and go on strike, that is an illegal strike and we will attack you with the military. Because of the Railroad Workers Act of, was it 1930 something, like a nearly 100-year-old law that was to squash this exact kind of rebellion from happening again like a century ago, and we had a more robust labor movement and like a communist party that actually did things and cared about people and had some kind of like influence on our political stage. They wanted to make sure they'd be able to squash that in the future, and then the opportunity presented itself, and they did. Is it because they are bad and evil people? I mean, maybe. I might say that. But it's because they needed to defend the interest of their own class, or at least the class that they represent. And that was, they basically walked up to Biden and said, do you support the owners or the workers? And he said, owners. Of course he did.
Yeah. And that's one other fun thing, too, that we're gonna run up with, too, is, like, Brenna, real quick, give us your political history. There you go.
I don't particularly have a political history. I know that, and this might be somewhat personal, but in my family, I have my grandparents who are what you'd call, they have like their political sightings, but they vote for who they personally think is the better candidate regardless of political standings. And then I have a cousin who needs to go back to history class because if he doesn't agree with a past president's opinion, then they're obviously the part of the opposing political division than himself, regardless of what history says. And so seeing all that argument, it's not really an argument so much as, I guess you'd call it disrespect, because if you have a specific political standing and the house you're going into is an opposing political standing, you typically know that politics should be talked about gingerly or respectfully, instead of doing what my cousin does, which is barge into my grandparents' house and start pissing and moaning about the political standing that happens to be, the political standings of your own freaking grandparents. And talking shit about it. And, and my grandparents are kind of too polite to say anything to them. But, like, just watching all of that, listening to all of that, watching the argument between my aunt and my uncle, because my aunt's one of those, she's aunt by marriage, but she's one of those people who, she votes specifically for the political party that she is a part of, regardless of basically, she doesn't care what the person is about, who they're about, as long as they are, she doesn't do any research, as long as they are the political party that she herself is attached to, or she has attached herself to, then that is who she votes for, regardless of anything, regardless of any information. But my uncle and the rest of my family are the kind of people that, yes, you should be honest with your spouse, you should be forthcoming, but there are some things that is between you, yourself, and whatever power you believe in. But she's the kind of person who will constantly, especially on voting day, who'd you vote for? Who'd you vote for? Who'd you vote for? To my uncle, and no matter how many times he tells her, I'm not discussing that with you, she'll keep going. So being and seeing and witnessing all that, and seeing what little I do have any information of politics at all, I sort of have no political standing or party that I personally tie myself to, so I don't really have much of a history except for my opinion of, and I'm sorry if this is controversial, but my opinion of, I'm sorry, I believe all politics when it comes to this is just especially when it comes to like elections and stuff, is just a who's who of how big of a liar can I be and actually get the job. But that's my opinion, and there you go.
This is partly why I love discussing economic issues so much, because it kind of cuts past. We aren't even presented economic issues as issues on the election path. Like, no Democrat gets up there and says we should fundamentally change ownership relations to disempower owners and the rentier class and empower the underclass of laborers. Like, they aren't saying any of that. They'll get up there and say, we think you should have your right to, like, what's the only thing that got not pushed through? We had a gay marriage act done by the Democrats, and it is sold to us as, haha, we have now put gay marriage into federal law and it can never be changed. That's not even what it is. Like, that it forces other states to recognize out-of-state gay marriage licenses. It in no way forces them to provide marriage licenses, and even if it does, awesome. I live in Alabama, I got gay married in Massachusetts, and now me and my homeless husband can keep living under this bridge. Thank you, Democrats, for all you have done for They did not kill MLK or Malcolm X until they started talking about economic issues. And when I talk to people who are either apolitical or they call themselves conservative, and we talk about economic issues, and I can manage to keep it divorced from any specific president or policy, we end up talking about the same things. They see the inefficiencies, the contradictions around them, how there's all this work to be done, yet there are unemployed people, how, like, there's people living on the street, and that should be and is unacceptable. And we end up agreeing, like, yeah, how do we get a more efficient allocation of resources? And my core argument is capitalism is not an efficient way anymore to allocate resources, to develop the productive forces, to give us things we need, like more food, more education, more housing, more heat in the winter, more air conditioning in the summer. It no longer does that. It, in fact, destroys those things because they have to keep prices up. That's why you end up with, oh crap, we have no natural gas. Even though, and like Biden's on TV begging the oil companies to like produce more gas, and they just say, no, why would we? Prices are very high right now and we want that. Why would we make more natural gas? And they're like, because we need to heat our houses. And it's like, bitch, we don't exist to heat your house. We exist to make dollar bills.
That's one thing too, is like, there's a lot of it that is very relevant in just how you present socialism or Marxism or anything on the left side of things to different people. My dad is a
most extreme version, and that's nauseating.
My dad is he's a very, well, he considers himself libertarian, but he's a big fan of Donald Trump. There's a lot of his personal beliefs that I find particularly abhorrent. But at the same time, there's a lot of things behind a lot of socialist theory that he's actually really well behind. It's just the moment you mention that big evil S word, suddenly he's against it because, well, he grew up in the 50s. This is like the whole thing that he was raised to be frightened of.
My positive spin on the Trump movement in general, and the place that I think that you should, a thing you could maybe get hardcore Trump people to hopefully recognize is like, guys, look at how hard, you're right, the establishment absolutely fought tooth and nail to keep that guy out of office. They did everything they could, and look how ineffective it was just because a whole lot of you wanted a thing to happen. Now imagine what else you could do if a whole lot, like you've shown that they will squat up and try to do whatever bullshit. And I'm not a type that says that the election was, quote, stolen. Like, I don't think there's a secret vote tally where Trump like had a blowout victory and it was kept from us. But the Democrat establishment put out an article in the New York Times shortly after the 2020 election detailing all of the stuff they did to make sure the election went the direction they wanted it to. And they'll say to make sure it was fair. It's like, yeah, but you all work for the Democratic Party. So what would you consider? Are you going to say, oh no, we were completely fair and free? We throw all the ways that our elections are not fair and free. Those all disappear from our minds as soon as a Trump person says, hey, the elections are a little fucky. Where the correct response should be, they are, but probably not in the way you think. Like, there's not like a bunch of dead people ballots getting thrown in a river or whatever crazy shit he was talking about. But there are horrible things that make our elections extremely undemocratic. And if enough of you get together and want a thing to happen, even if the establishment wants to resist it, you've demonstrated that you can kind of force their hand on at least some of this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another thing too, since we brought that up a little bit. Considering what she has said about her political history, I've said in the past, like, about like leftism or the right wing and a lot of those classical political terms. She is completely unfamiliar with a lot of those. So I think we should go into like just some of the basics. What the fuck is left and right wing politics?
If you go to the terms left and right wing refer to wings of a building, right? In the French Revolution, it was the French Parliament House, Versailles, I don't know. But all of the like monarchists, conservative, we support the monarchist class at that point. Because remember, the French Revolution was the bourgeois overthrowing royalty. Marx sees human history as a series of class conflicts. And the most recent revolutions in all of our historical memory would be like the 1800s, heck, even 1600s, where it was a bunch of people overthrowing their kings. The people overthrowing the kings were usually a class of like the shopkeepers and like the small craftsmen, what are today the bourgeois, the people who make stuff, own stores, that kind of shiz. And now the goal is for then the next step, where now we have the workers and the business owners, where they aren't in charge because where kings were in charge because they said like God told me I should be told all of you to worship me because I am the king, and people were like, yeah, okay, I'm a peasant, I buy it, I can't even read. And then eventually that became, oh, that's nonsense. And now we get ruled by people who just own things. We are ruled through like contracts and gangsterism, really. A bunch of gangsters got together and decided they own your town and you better pay them or they're going to kill you. That's just how America works. And we call that capitalism, right? So the left wing would be the bourgeois, which sounds weird because you're like, what? I thought left wing people hate the bourgeois. It's like, well, at the time, French Revolution, right wing was monarchists, left wing was bourgeois, who were fighting for rights like freedom, liberty, very vague, non-economic goals that they're going for, justice. Like, I guess it is better to have our current trial system than like the king's nephew comes down and says guilty, or like trial by combat or whatever. Like that is probably better. So my current political understanding after following like Obama was getting elected right when I was like first able to vote, and he's like, hope and change, free college. I'm like, hell yeah, hope, change, free college. Then that didn't really lead to anything. And then then he went to the Bernie Sanders movement where he's like, no, hope, change, but like actually, because also socialism, and we're gonna all unite, and working class and stuff. And then even Bernie today is like voting to fund the military and voting to fund the wars. And you start going, oh, left and right wing are both wings of capital C capital. You get two flavors to choose from. You can have the nice version, which is left people, or you can have the mean version, which is right people. But when it comes to things like military funding, war spending, and reinforcing our empire's stability, they all agree.
Yeah, and that's one thing that's sort of lost on a lot of people, is that the thing about the left-right spectrum is that, yeah, it's all part of the same system. Like for right wing, you get a lot of more emphasis on tradition, consistency, stability, order, and whatnot. On the left wing, you get more of an emphasis supposedly on individual freedoms, different rights and stuff, or other sort of expansions, progressivism, stuff like that.
It's those vague rights of freedom, justice, liberty, where it's like, yeah, those all sound really good, but then that's what right-left, that's where they seem to differ, is where what does that vague term justice mean? These vague terms, liberty, freedom, that's what we get to fight over. Never stuff like, do I have the right to a house? Yeah,
and for that also is like, that model, in my opinion, is kind of flawed, just as much as sort of an improved model, the two-axis, where it's like, you've got right, left, and then authoritarian versus libertarian on different axes, because obviously you can have an authoritarian right. Take a look at fascism in general. You can also have an authoritarian left, like Stalinist brand communism, versus the sort of more utopian style of socialism, where it's basically no major government oversight. Everybody can do essentially whatever the hell they want, and everything is essentially free and open. Or you can also have a similar sort of thing in the right side of it. But in that sense too, you can keep adding on to it, because I'm sure there's easily, while you've got the XY axis of both of those, you can add a Z axis onto it, and also find some other definition that would sort of more easily combine everything in like a 3D map. But one big problem I've always found with the just sort of right versus left is essentially, yeah, it's all part of the same system. It all fundamentally focuses on whether or not you're getting more or less control in the system that already exists, versus whether that's control via the government having oversight, or control as in like individualized personal liberty or whatever.
People will pull up, there's a couple of Marx quotes where he'll talk about electoral participation, and they'll bring that to me and say, Pepper, but you see, even Marx tells us that we need to work within electoralism and vote our way to change. And what he says in the quotes are, yeah, if it is for a strong revolutionary communist party. He doesn't say vote for the lesser of two evils. Like, we've mushed ourselves into lesser of two evil mode, where we look at the two choices and try to make a moral decision, because fundamentally it is true that both of them will end up representing capital, because if they didn't represent the interests of capital and the ruling class, they just wouldn't be put up as a candidate. And you watch that happen with even Bernie Sanders, who is not a hardcore revolutionary guy who's going to like, he doesn't even talk about fundamentally changing owner relations. He just talks about being slightly nicer to workers, convincing your dad to give you a slightly later bedtime or more cookies. Like, that is not, that's what you have with like the Nordic model, where people go, oh, we need socialism, just like Finland. It's like, Finland doesn't have social, they have a ruling class. They just happen to get a lot more concessions for their working class, which is an effort to get them to not do a revolution and overthrow their owning class. And you would be amazed at how low the standards of living would become in these Nordic countries if they did not have various African and other third world nations to be extracting resources from.
Yeah, it literally ends up being like that old adage of you can't polish a turd. In this case, it literally is. Like, you still got the same shitty system, but it's got a few shiny bells and whistles to make it more attractive.
It's what the early American government would do whenever we get a little close to a rebellion. They would just throw out another right to white people. They would give white dudes another right to like, all right, stop making friends with the slaves just because you're noticing that your interest is fundamentally more in common than with us, the owners. So we're going to give just white men the ability to vote. And that would like break up a rebellion. Like the whiskey rebellion would take off, and they'd be like, okay, hold on, shut up. Okay, we're going to give business owners a couple more rights. Please don't do a riot. And that's how we end up where we are. And I love that we have things like a weekend and a 40-hour work week. At least some people do. They're stripping those away from a whole lot of different jobs, and some jobs never had it. But we only have that through bloody class struggle where a bunch of dudes in Chicago would go on strike. I didn't even say dudes, a bunch of men, women, and children, because those were also laborers at the time.
Yeah.
Go on strike, and then the cops would shoot them. And then after a while, they go, okay, this is a little heinous. Let's give them a weekend or something. What's one of the things? All right, you get a 50-hour work week, and now we're raising the working age to 9.
And that's also a thing too, specifically on wages, like the whole $15 minimum wage thing that everybody's been trying to push for a long time. We're still sitting at technically the same federal minimum wage of like, what, $7.25? That hasn't changed in recent years, even though most jobs right now, just because it's more competitive, are actually offering that $15 an hour wage. But of course, with how much everything's gone up lately, I can even say from personal experience, with what I make, about a little over $17.50 an hour, plus a little bonus from working on overnights, I'm still in exactly the same kind of conditions for myself and my wife that we were about 5 years ago. Literally nothing has changed. I'm making more money, but that more money is still getting spent on exactly the same things, and it goes just as fast.
So I want to keep myself from just rolling off onto another rant that's full of jargon, because I can do that for freaking hours. to preface and set up the, I don't have a lot. Most of the questions when I ask people like, hey, what do you want to know about socialism, Marxism? It usually comes down to like, can you talk to me about this very specific thing and how it will be or would be under a socialist government? And while I can write fanfic all day, and I would love to talk about ways that like could be, the main goal of socialism is simply to make the workers be the ones in power, the producers, the people who actually do the labor, to be in control of their own destiny. The idea being that right now we have decisions handed down by like literally 5 or 6 people maybe that affect your life in such drastic ways that if instead of that being a separate class that has separate interests from you, and if instead that was your fellow workers making these decisions, that they would end up being the kinds of I talk about like, oh, morals aren't really part of this. The decisions that we would make for each other would almost definitely be more, we would all agree, more moral and ethical than the ones we like. Would we all vote that we have to live in a box and like eat 1 meal a day and you can't afford this and you can't afford? Would we vote to keep our conditions as they are right now? Would we vote to pollute all of our shit? Would we vote to destroy the world? I think that we would not. So with that preface there, where it's going to be hard for me to do any kind of like, well, what would the president under social, like, will there be, like, I don't really know. Whatever the workers decide, that's kind of part of it, is that you don't get some god king who then tells you all, I'm the socialism understander and I will tell you what to do and you will do exactly as I say. Like, that's not part of it. What throw me some things to bounce off of, especially Brenna, if you have less, you've put less I love politically neutral people because they end up being easier to talk to. Not that you're politically neutral and just like, oh, I'm a centrist, that I have no strong feelings whatsoever. Not throwing that on you. Just people who aren't, I don't know, ideologically poisoned. If you were like, Hillary Clinton till I die, like that'd be a harder place to start a conversation from.
Yeah, unfortunately, I guess you call me a bit of a realist. I know human beings are flawed individuals. Nobody's perfect, so I don't hang my hat on a specific banner. But that is also a very difficult thing for me because of, I guess, where I stand is like it's hard to ask a question when you don't know the subject matter to ask the question of. If that makes any sense.
All right, what do you let's and this isn't a way for me to like try and trick you into like saying something like, oh haha, you're so wrong. But what do you even think, what do you think socialism would, like when I talk about there has to be a revolution, like what do you think that would even entail? Because I don't know, I get the idea that, especially my mom, like I think my mom thinks that what I want is everyone wears the same shirt and then we all do a goose step march through the town square or something. Like we look at North Korea and then we do a cosplay, and that's what socialism is.
I mean, if that was what socialism was, you wouldn't catch me doing it, only because I'm someone who believes in individuality entirely. But and I'm too fond of being myself. I finally got to a point in my life growing up that I am not only me, I understand who me is, so I ain't giving me up for nobody.
I think that is kind of a fundamental fear, because that's what you're told, like communism in the US. It's it's a system where your whole life is decided for you because they have a central plan, and then that means you have to work this exact job or the government, or you'll be thrown out on the streets, and you don't get to have any individuality. Everyone lives in the same house, everyone drives the same car, everyone just has everything. Where at the risk of it being whataboutism, I hate the word whataboutism, because when I get accused of whataboutism, it's usually me trying to put a consistent criteria across my judgments, where if I'm going to judge anything, I need to have some kind of criteria for comparison. And I think of how much of our current lives under our capitalist mode of production is, while not explicitly predetermined, you don't get like a Hogwarts letter that says, and you will be a grocery worker, and then you must do your economic position, zip code. I mean, in your guys' situation, access to transportation very much limits what your life is and kind of does determine it for you. It's just not explicitly thrown at you. You instead get to walk around in the dark until you hopefully find the slot that capitalism has put out for you, or you become homeless.
To sort of answer your earlier inquiry, since my husband has mentioned that a lot of like what I personally believe kind of lines up with what he's not really explained but basically said seems to line up with his feelings on socialism. If a revolution were to happen of any kind, my personal thoughts, I suppose, is literally, how do I put this? It's not the everybody wears the same shirt or same clothes or has a uniform, or we don't march in the street like some utilitarian military state, but or anything like that. But to my personal opinion, if there had to be a revolution, it wouldn't be with sticks and stones. It would be with actual honest communication between human beings, of like being able to say, hey, I don't like that, and not be given, oh well, everybody else is doing this response. As far as like capital or money, people being, regardless of gender, race, financial stipulations, whether they are considered low, mid, or high class. Like, I would honestly think that the low, mid, and high class thing personally should just kind of be, not really, I guess the best way to say it is dissolved, because there's so many people who still think in that regards of like who is better, that what is the word? Superiority complex would need to disappear too. I mean, it's great to be proud of yourself. It's another thing to be down on somebody else because of what their political or personal standings are, being finances or otherwise. So I will, like, in all honesty, I guess the best way to say it is, if there had to be a revolution, and I'm sorry for going in circles, but if there had to be a revolution of any kind, it would need to be to actually understand what is and isn't, like, actual genuine equality is, if that makes any sense.
This is kind of comes to why I earlier when I said I love talking to people who aren't really ideologically poisoned, because you didn't start throwing out like XY, like Clinton policy. You described where an end to class, which is an explicit goal of a Marxist revolution. Like the whole point of going through the process of socialism being a transitory way to get to capital C communism. One of the definitions of a communist society is a stateless, classless society. We do have more than two classes technically, if you want to get really granular about like, oh well, you're a proletarian, but you're a lumpen proletarian because you're a service worker and you don't work for heavy industry or whatever. But really, you have owners and you have workers. The owners only get money because of the workers. So if we flattened our class society, if we eliminated class distinctions, and suddenly it wasn't a thing where, oh, I just own all of this vast private property being like factory tracts of land, 7-8 different houses, real estate things. If that suddenly just wasn't a thing, if we didn't have this class relation of I'm the one who owns all the stuff, I'm the one who works all the stuff, that would just change. I don't know exactly what would change and exactly how, but it sure would be a step towards the kind of world that I think we all want to live in. It would definitely be a more democratic society, and like I was talking about before, we would then be able to have the power to make decisions that I assume we would not be making the decisions of, hey, let's put people in prison, let's do slavery legally but in a prison system, let's make our food mildly poisonous, like let's like all the things that we live with now, let's make the air unbreathable. So I love that you brought up the elimination of class. And to be more specific with, because people talk about the revolution or a revolution, you get the idea in your head of kind of like in like almost in movies where the rebels all get together, we get in a room and it's like 3, 2, 1, do it, revolution. The way it's happened historically is out of some kind of worker complaint or incident. You can trace like various revolutions back to either a famine or a strike or heck, right now, what is it in Iran, where there was like one lady got killed by the morality police and that spun out into this whole big national
Mm-hmm.
I kind of wish the railroad workers would go on strike, because I could absolutely see that as a potential revolutionary catalyst. But to have the kind of workers' revolution that I want, it does come with, as you were just describing, it has to have some kind of intentionality with a goal of, for instance, eliminating class or changing ownership production. Because if a whole bunch of people get together and have a big event, it doesn't necessarily lead to anything better. It could just lead to a different group of owners leading. It could shove us backwards, where suddenly we're in like neo-feudalism, cyberpunk future. Like after the revolution, maybe fucking Elon takes over as God. Like, you have to have some kind of I hate the word ideological because it makes it sound like we're all zealots and we wear monk robes and we pray to Marx. But you have to have some kind of education. Like, list of demands. Specific demands are a core part of it. That's another thing you brought up. Jeez.
That's one thing too that I want to jump on real quick. Saying like how you mentioned a specific education. That's one sort of misconception I think a lot of people get about socialism, is because a lot of people will automatically tell you basically about all these dusty old tomes and old theories and stuff that you have to read. Because like, yeah, if you want to get the true understandings behind anything socialist, sure, you got to read through Marx, Lenin.
If you're going to be forming a government, maybe you should read a book.
Yeah, read a fucking book. But like, at the same time, there's the impression that you need to do all this research to even somewhat simply grasp it. You can see from what Brenna has just said that even at base value, she does have like an understanding of some of these kinds of principles, you don't need to be like a person who can like truly understand Rick and Morty to be a fan of socialism.
We live under the system. Like we are the working class. We experience the contradictions of capitalism on a daily basis. So when you're actually hitting on something worth it, that's why Marxism stuck around for over 150 years. It shows saliency over and over of like, no, he's correctly identifying some stuff that we experience. The revolution will never be successful if it forces everyone to accept a bunch of stuff that they don't like understand and isn't intuitive. These concepts are super intuitive. You start out with this like knee-jerk this gut feeling of, oh, I think this is how the thing works, and then you study, and then you come right back around to, oh yeah, I was right in the beginning, I just didn't have all of the terminology. What is inflation? Your gut feeling is, inflation seems to be when companies raise prices on us because like they just decide they want more money, so they do it. And then you'll be told by an economist like, oh no, well, you see, there's all this currency valuation, and as the government prints more money, that lowers the value of currency, and then there's a production and supply and demand, and then you learn that, like, oh, that's all kind of bullshit. They produce these things years sometimes before we're ever going to consume them, so how is it possibly answering some kind of demand? Where do fidget spinners fit in to this view of economics? And then after a whole bunch of like reading Marx and looking at all these charts and diagrams and graphs, and you read Capital and all that shit, then you come back around, oh, they're just raising prices on us because they can. Like, that really is what's happening. The thing you feel in your gut intuitively turns out to be true. And it's not the whole like, oh, you're just finding a conclusion and then getting scientific reasoning to support it. If that's true, these theories would have fallen apart somewhere in the 1800s and wouldn't just be proving themselves more and more accurate by the day, because he was writing about little baby capitalism where there were still thousands and thousands of owners. Now we have like dozens, maybe dozen of owners or at least, or companies really, like these trusts that they all put their money into. And man, it's not that it predicted the future, it just accurately identified how capitalist economies work. So the model continues to be true, where bourgeois economics, like the actual capitalists who write their own economic books, have to keep changing their models every few years because they don't truly understand. They're like, what's happening? Because you can't understand it on a supplied, like on their terms, because they don't actually have a theory of how these economics work. They have a series of justifications for why certain people should own everything. That's all. Like, I want to throw out my one other main contradiction of capital. Like, so the first one we have is the socialized production. Everybody works to make the thing, and it takes a ton of people, and none of these apparatus could be, you can't run a factory as the factory owner by yourself. You need to hire a bunch of people to do it, but then you decide as the owner, the capitalist, owner of the capital, how much each individual employee gets. I also want to bring up tendency of rate of profit to decline, which is like the most eloquent way of putting that one. How over and over we see these capitalist crises, where especially freaking point around today, we have like a 10-year economic crisis every other year. How many times have we personally watched the economy collapse?
Oh my god, like specifically the Great Recession of late 2000s was a good example, but then like everything that we saw coming about after COVID with
we're definitely in a decline period right now, and it's again, I've spent most of my life in a recession or a decline period, and it seems like we're building towards another World War I/II sized crisis of capitalism that then must be fixed, quote, so like it has to be temporarily stabilized.
And that's one thing too. We actually hit on that a little bit in one of our previous episodes where we were talking about generations. If I remember correctly, you were born in 91, right, Pep?
Yes.
Yeah. Myself too. Brenna was born 89, so we're all relatively around the same age. We've all seen a lot of the same similar shit that's gone on in like the American culture over the last 30 years and how that's affected everything. We've been around long enough to see how things were before everything went completely apeshit after 9/11 to how things have been shaping up ever since like post-Obama.
we've been relatively stabilized for a bit. Like, we haven't had another full-on Great Depression, even though the generalized misery of the American people, I think, has just kind of continuously expanded, where we have more and more homeless people. We got more and more people who are on who can't afford food, who can't afford their basic housing. So the tendency of rate of profit to decline, like, why does that happen consistently? Why is that considered like a law of, well, it's not a law because it has yet to be fully proven or disproven, and it just keeps hanging around as a theory for like over 100 years now, and none of the bourgeois economists can explain it away, and none of the Marxian economists can fully prove. Like, there's always enough wiggle. So here's the basic idea. If you have, I don't know, let's say you started with a freaking chocolate factory, and you have X number of employees, and they do a bunch of labor and they make chocolate. Well, as time goes on, technology keeps moving, technique improves, we get better at making chocolate. So now you can make even more chocolate with those same number of employees. So eventually you're going to stop making profits because you're making more chocolate. So the market value, like if you look at supply and demand economics, the supply continues to increase while demand probably stays the same, right? Like, you don't have a ton of new people who suddenly want a ton of chocolate. So the more chocolate you can produce, the cheaper you end up having to sell the chocolate for. And you can only squeeze excess profit off of laborers, right? Like, you don't get paid the full value of what you work for. You don't even have to explain that to people anymore. Everybody just kind of gets that. It's like, yeah, I make $1, boss makes $1, I make a dime. It's why I poop on company time. Like, yeah. we know these things. These are just like truisms. Every American kind of agrees at this point. So you cannot squeeze profit out of a machine because you can't make a machine work faster or harder or longer hours than it as a machine can do. Whereas a human, you can like threaten its family. And they'll be like, I'm sorry, boss, I'll come in, I'll work later, I'll work harder, I'll make more chocolate. Which just happens as a gradual process. Our productivity goes up. We've all seen that chart. Our pay stays about the same. So inevitably, if this process continues, eventually, this is when people talk about automation in the like negative, bad automation, where instead of it producing excess and like, oh my God, we have so much stuff, there's definitely enough for everyone now. Well, those employees can't afford to buy the products themselves. So you see how this makes a cyclical crisis of capitalism. When we talk about capitalist overproduction, that's what it is. It's, how come we can't afford chocolate, Dad? I know why I chose chocolate instead of like some essential heavy industry. I chose a luxury item instead. How come we can't afford chocolate, Dad? Well, I lost my job at the chocolate factory. Why is that? Well, chocolate got too cheap because we made too much chocolate. So I can't afford chocolate because there is too much chocolate. Just add that to any other thing and you have the exact same issue. I can't afford coal to heat my house because there's too much coal and coal's too cheap. I can't afford food because there's too much food, so the price of food went down. So instead of even bringing the food to market, they buried it in a field or dumped all the milk out of the truck, like we've all seen on TV a million times before.
You saying that actually reminded me about the whole chocolate thing. My dad actually did for a while work at a chocolate factory. I don't know if you know it, Russell Stover's.
Oh, geez, yeah. So a massive chocolate company, like a national chocolate factory.
And he used to tell me stories about when he was working there. And one of them was the fact that, you know, when they had like a surplus during like Christmas or something like that, the company would actually give the workers boxes of like the free boxes of the extra assorted chocolate boxes, like those big boxes that you get sometimes for people that have like all the different kinds of chocolates in the little tiny wrappers inside the box that usually are like $20, $30, $40.
Yeah, that was Minesweeper for me because I'm allergic to peanuts, so some of those chocolates.
Oh, right.
That's okay, my dad didn't like coconut, so he had the same problem. But he used to tell me about all of that, and that like, and it's like, so you got free boxes of candy basically because you made too much in a year. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, do they still do that now? And he was like, no. It's like they were like 20 boxes when I was working there. They're like, or $20 a box when I was working there. They're not like $50 a box now, and there's not even that many. There's not even as much chocolate in the box as there used to be.
The hope would be, like, if we lived in a logical society, that as you produce excess, that would mean plenty for everyone, like, in that community, right? Like, in a logical world. And that's what socialism is, everybody. You take the massive forces of production that capitalism has built up over the last 150 years, because you would have, like, a reactionary opinion would be like, oh, well, that means we need to break up and make all chocolate factories into little worker-owned individual co-ops. And I would say no, because that will end up in a net, like, less that'd be going backwards. I like that we can produce billions and billions of calories because we need those to survive. Like, when did population on Earth suddenly spike? It was the Industrial Revolution. Is that just because, oh, I love smokestacks and steam power, so we're gonna bang out 90 kids now? Like, no, the amount of calories produced increased. Like, we suddenly had more food, we had more power, and we could support a larger population. That I like. I don't want to have us go back to caloric deficiencies where we have, like, starvation and famines again. I like factory farming because it allows more humans to live. Now, do we need to do all the shitty factory farming practices? No, we only do those because it's run under the capitalist mode of production.
And not only that, but just also the when it comes to the Industrial Revolution, a lot of the technological innovations of the time, like this wild invention called refrigerator, and better means of transportation to help get a lot of those perishable goods across the country or even overseas in time for them still to be consumable. Just some of the innovations like that helped basically all those companies grow to what they are today, but at the same time also created somewhat of a positive for giving access to people, a lot more access to all those different goods and services that they wouldn't otherwise be able to. Whereas
centralized production is good because it allows us to make so many of them. The problem is the feudal allocation of the profit and product, where everyone who worked at the refrigerator factory, half of them probably could not afford to buy the refrigerators that they made. That's what they told me the Great Depression was when I was, like, in 6th grade. That's how they described it, and it's like, yep, that is what happened. And that is what will continue to happen because capitalism runs in cycles. You end up with companies when the USSR was showing up and automobile automation was going crazy, like Ford and them, the assembly line, all that. There were producers of equipment that could make automobiles faster and cheaper, and they could not sell them to capitalist countries because they're like, no. If we start making that many cars that fast, like the prices will tank, and we won't be like, it'll fuck up our whole economy. But the USSR is like, well, our economy, the purpose of it is to produce and distribute resources to the people who live here. So yeah, bring it on. We'd love to make an insane amount of cars even cheaper and more quickly.
And that's one thing too that I was just starting to hit on, was that one of the most common, like, I don't know if I really want to call it a dog whistle, but like one of the classic things that you hear about socialism and communism is that it would be harmful because capitalism and free market tends to encourage technological innovation and invention and all that, as if nothing was ever created under communism or socialism ever.
There was a point when that was absolutely true. Like, near the end of Marx's life, definitely capitalism in general was increasing the forces of production. We made more stuff every year. But once you reach a certain point where you're making about as much as you can, and then you tip over into overproduction, where you're the only way you make money is by making the thing, so you better just make more and more of the thing, and then you clog the market, nobody can afford it. Like how you end up with housing crises and all these things, is because eventually capitalism has to maintain itself, has to start reducing. It has to find ways to get new markets, and continually, forever, infinite expansion of markets. Like, you have to have new people to sell this stuff to, and eventually it's like, well, how do we find new people to sell it to? We've already taken over our entire country. Let's do a war. And you get World War I and II, which was not partially, almost entirely. Like, when people talk about the Civil War being about economics, they're technically correct. because it was the lack of willingness to give up a literally free labor source as a component in the capitalist mode of production. Like, they needed markets for cotton. They needed a labor source to continue to like be able. Imagine how much of the tendency of rate of profit to decline was staved off by having a literally free labor force.
Yeah, like especially with some of the innovations that had started coming around, like the cotton gin being a big thing that's always talked about as like increasing the ability for a lot of these materials manufacturers to just supply the raw materials to textile mills up in the north and even some southern ones, versus how it was just before that, where everything was all hand-picked and essentially hand-carded and woven to where it'd be sent off as raw materials. Just the amount of labor that was necessary for that being a big shift.
I think the funniest, tangentially related just to the thing of just like horrible things done by people, by industry, not by people. You know, it was a chart in one of Lenin's books where it shows it's like percentage of each continent owned or controlled by England, and it was like 18 something Africa 10%. It was like 1890 Africa 90%. And it's like, oh my god. England took over all of Africa in 10 years. You gotta expand your markets. If no one is left in America who can buy a Ford, and you can't convince XY sovereign nation to just start importing all your cars because they probably have their own little auto industry they're trying to get off the ground, well, do a war, take them over, doing a whole bunch of crap in South America, like Banana Republic. So we're kind of like a product of that. I'm starting to overexpand my historical knowledge and connecting things that aren't really connected, but I think you get what I'm going for.
Or we could release the exact same product, but change it slightly and say it's new. We've got this Ford F-150 that if we just decrease the size of the trim on this mirror by like 3%, we can claim it's a new model and sell you the exact same thing. Why?
Planned obsolescence definitely helps you because it's like, crap, how can we, without expanding markets, just use the exact same market again and sell it to them 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times? And I'm here with my 8th iPhone, like, yep, it's me.
I wonder what Marx and any of the classic writers of the time would have thought of just the sheer concept of a mega corporation like Nestle, or more importantly like Unilever, Monsanto, and shit like that. To bring this back to the very first things I was talking about describing socialism, like as a science, as a method through which, like, if I were to observe electrical phenomena like static electricity and etc. and current and all that without any electrical knowledge or knowledge of like, oh, see, there's like protons and neutrons and electrons, and they throw an electron over to this atom, which then it's current and all that. Like, imagine trying to explain. You just have to go to like magic or to try and explain what you were experiencing, and you can use socialism in a similar way to view economics in a way that starts making them make sense. Because how do you explain something like planned obsolescence? And the gut feeling is like, oh, they just want to be able to sell you the same crappy thing twice. But then you'll go to a bourgeois economist, who will say, like, no, you see, these are improvements, these are new versions, this is innovation. That was the iPhone 4, this is the iPhone 5. Supply and demand, the consumer demanded better electronics, this is innovation. And it's like, well, that doesn't really make any sense. But if you go through the explanation that me and Misfit just did, it makes a ton of sense. You have to be able to continually expand markets for iPhones, because iPhone production must continually ramp up forever and ever, or because of the tendency of the rate of profit to decline. Why can't we have Huawei phones in the US? Is it because China's scary? Maybe. Is it because it would fuck up the cell phone market here? Probably a bit. The real brain melter there is China scary because it would cut into the big company profits? And that's where we get into something interesting.
I think that is the primary reason that we view China as a threat, is economic ones. If we cared about human rights violations, we'd stop doing them.
Right.
China has all these people in jail. Look at the US prison population. Please. This isn't whataboutism. It's just, can we apply a consistent criteria when making moral judgments? We have free slave labor in the US now, and we've had that since we quote unquote eliminated slavery in the same amendment, I think it's the 13th, that also legalizes slavery in conditions of punishment for a crime.
Yep. The fact that that one is still on the books should alarm a lot more people, more than just the simplicity of, oh, well, that sounds bad. I guess I better avoid going to prison. I was like, no, but what about the people that are actually fucking in there?
So why do left and right both support that? Neither Democrats nor Republicans are jumping up to try and repeal or alter the 13th Amendment, because the forces of their capitalist leaders, the people, their actual constituents, their class friends, need prison labor. Like, prison labor is a huge industry, way bigger. Like, people think it's like stamping license plates or some shit like it was in the 60s and 70s. They run call centers. Like, the people making big deals, making millions of dollars for companies, a lot of them are prisoners that are paid $5 a day, because that's way bigger than the $1 a day or fucking cents a day if you're in Florida or Louisiana, whatever, that you would make at other prison jobs. So that thing will never go away, because you can see where this left-right dichotomy sort of becomes almost silly, because issues that actually matter, or could maybe be seen as a sign of, oh, we think that ownership relations should change, just do not happen.
I don't know if this has anything to do with anything, but that you saying that does kind of make me want to mention how, you know, the whole prison thing, a lot of people went to prison for like having especially in history, not having enough money or funds or finances to feed their family. And with certain rights being turned over and removed to a degree, like things that we never thought would be overturned in court have now been overturned in court in a lot of areas. That's gonna be more people in prison, I feel.
Yeah. And it's helpful when you analyze this. It's like, oh, why would they do that? Is it because they're immoral and just evil people who just want a bunch of people in jail? It's like, maybe, but definitely they have the economic donor interest of the people who run prison labor corporations kind of get to choose the candidates a hell of a lot more than any individual voter does. And are they going to choose a candidate that's really about eliminating prison labor? Morals do matter, and I believe that the workers would make decisions, if put in power, that would be considered far more moral than the ones getting made by our leaders. But the ideology doesn't necessarily matter. The ideology gets cooked up to justify what is. Like, you hear all these various versions of why people deserve to be in jail, or, well, you don't do the crime if you don't pay the time. It's like, gotta rehabilitate. This is our system of justice here in America. Like, but that all gets cooked up after the fact to justify free prison labor, because otherwise you're stuck there left with the internal contradiction and cognitive dissonance of this horribly unfair thing is happening, and why is nothing being done about it? And you don't want to go insane, so you just go, it only happens to bad people.
That's one of the classic talking points that kind of got me on board with socialism as a whole, was just the simple idea of, like, it may be a little bit of utopian thinking, but if everybody's needs are met, if all your bills are taken care of, if you got light, you've got food, you've got heat, all those things are taken care of, literally what incentive is there to do crime other than you're just kind of a dick? Because most people they're usually stealing because it's either something they need, or they know they can turn it into something they need, like either selling off some jewelry they sold from some rich fuck to a pawn shop just so they can get food for their kids, or even something as simple as maybe they have an addiction, and just to keep themselves going for another day, they're doing something sketchy to try and get that.
If you eliminate crimes of desperation, or crimes of necessity, however you want to say it, it sure does make the practice of policing a lot more defendable, because instead of going around and definitely just, oh, you're preventing this really poor person from doing whatever they have to do to survive, and move to, oh, like they're entirely provided for. They were just walking around the street stabbing people for no reason. Like, it makes sense. Like, oh yeah, send them out there. Let's stop that guy.
Yeah, like, I'm sure there's going to be a couple of people out there who have that kind of view that they're going to do something just because they can, but the thing is, they would do that under a capitalist society just as much as they would do it under a socialist society, or even a fucking fascist society. If you've got that impulse and drive that you want to stab a motherfucker, you're going to stab that motherfucker no matter what the reason is, or what would be potentially preventing you from doing it, if you've set your mind to that.
It's almost it's a parallel conversation to like what do we do about guns in the U.S. because it's a really long, boring thing of in general get your society to a point where there is less motivation or fewer desperate people who are in a situation where they think it's a good idea to shoot up a mall. Like, it's a combination of better access to mental health care, like the one that gets thrown around is almost like a meme every time there's a shooting now. It's like, I don't know, start fixing general society, which is such a boring answer, and it sounds like you're hand waving it. But like, if you just take away, like, how do you take away guns? Like, how? Like, you just walk around with a van with a giant magnet and hope that.
And that's another thing too, is like, anytime any of those shootings come up, or especially a school shooting being the big meme of the fucking United States as of late, at least so far as, well, I'm sure that they were happening before and not just as widely reported, there does seem to be an increase. We can look to a lot of statistics that have shown what the motivation behind a lot of those are, and a lot of the politicians that have their opinions like, we need to get rid of guns, or the right's common thing of, you'll never take away our guns. The one thing that I always want to post about it, but usually have enough better judgment, is that the reason the right is so on board with guns and so against abortion is because they want to raise more targets.
It is core to Marxism that you address the material conditions and look at things as they actually are. Because while it's a great time to, what I called earlier, to write fanfic about, oh, if only America didn't have this many guns, and or if we could take X guns from X people. Well, you have to acknowledge the situation as it is. We have, I think it's at this point, two firearms for every man, woman, and child in America, and those are mostly concentrated in the hands of people who are ideologically probably kind of scary to at least everybody in this conversation. But at the same time, it's like, if you do the whole take away their guns, we're just going to send Democrat operatives, I guess, to every house and be like, give us your weapons. First of all, it'd be the police having to do it, and we all have our opinions on them, and who do you think they would be really trying to take the firearms from, and who would be like, oh, he's a cool guy, I know him, just leave him alone. Like, and then who would they be red flagging? It would, I'm sure, be like, some neo-Nazis, some Klans people, hopefully. And again, it'd be the cops doing it, so what, are they all going to arrest each other? But they would be marking people like me. Like, I thought they're talking about Marxism and Leninism, and they're like, oh, this guy's a revolutionary who wants to overthrow the U.S. government. Let's raid his house. Like, that's the kind of people who would end up who already are FBI raided. Like, there are black liberation movements in St. Louis, Florida, Louisiana, who even just this year have been FBI raided and had some guy carted away on BS charges as if it was the 70s still. Like, the pattern has not really changed.
Yeah, basically anything that dares to threaten the status quo is like an instant target for almost anything when it comes to the kind of people that the police would be going after in that kind of circumstance.
You have to approach America as it is, which is a country where already pretty much everybody has a gun.
Yeah. Speaking for myself, like, I personally don't own a gun, neither does Brenna. We've both, I'm sure, used them in the past. I know I have. But like, for me, I choose not to own one because it doesn't match my temperament. Like, I have a very long fuse when it comes to a lot of things, but once I get to a point, like, I don't trust myself with one. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, if I had to get utopian and write fanfic, I think that you go to kind of like a British model where it's like, yeah, you still have firearm access, but it's licensed but again, this would be licensed to a state that is not our current capitalist state, because I don't freaking trust our current capitalist state. You see how they abuse the laws we currently have.
Yep.
We have like civil asset forfeiture and stuff, where they'll just take your money and be like, yeah, we thought you were going to do a crime with it. Like, they have absolute authority over us, and I don't want to give them even more. But if we had a proletarian state, a state run by the workers, like some kind of licensure system, some kind of proof of competency, much like a driver's license, and then an extremely restricted list of firearms you can just have, like, I would say a full elimination of all semi-automatic weapons, and all my gun friends would be like, boo, unacceptable from my cold dead hands. But it's very hard to shoot up an entire elementary school if you get one shot at a time and there's only 6 in the rifle.
It's also really hard to do that, or even want to do that, if, like you said earlier, all of the needs are met. And 2, I don't know, this might be a little rude to say, but actually get rid of bullying and harassment that causes the temperament to want to take some firearm to a school or a mall.
Elimination of class sure would lend a lot to that.
Yeah.
I know, right?
As soon as you can address like the sort of innate elitism that a lot of people have in like, I have the brand new PS5. What? You're still using a PS4? Ha ha ha, pleb.
They get cyberbullied over freaking Fortnite skins now, and that sounds like a joke.
No shit.
Like, online video games, like loot boxes, that's like a whole nother part of the insidiousness of the child gambling, is that you're like uncool at school if you don't have the right like dance emote unlocked.
I just got this cool rare skin for my knife in CSGO. Are the kids still playing CSGO?
I mean, that was like a microcosm of at least in our childhood. So I gotta not keep branching off on other topics, but final thing about video game things, not saying either of these are correct or right or exactly what we should do, and again, you have to acknowledge the material conditions of where you are, and you can't just copy and paste policies on people. But China recently put in the go touch grass rule, basically, where if you're under 18, you only get a certain amount of online multiplayer video gaming per day. Obviously, they didn't put a lock on everybody's Super Nintendo or single-player offline things, but like Fortnite, etc., they're limited to, I think, 90 minutes or 40 minutes per day. So in the US, you could say, oh, well, parents should just not let their kids play online video games, 24 hours a day, and they should personally be limiting their child's choice. And what does that make you if your parents do that? And you're you're the weird kid who isn't allowed to play video games, and that's a whole nother form of bullshit. In China, everybody has the same rules, like, well, we got 40 minutes a day, everybody, let's all time it so we can all play together, and then you have to get the hell off the internet.
Oh my god, I can't believe this is actually relevant. I can finally talk about fucking Mabinogi in a way. So, Mabinogi, a game made by Nexon. They, a long time ago, back when it was just in Korea, because Nexon was originally like a Korean company, they actually had playtime limits, because that used to be pretty much policy in South Korea and a few of the other countries that they served, where people under a certain age could only be on social games and stuff like that for a certain amount of time every day. So that's kind of interesting to see that coming kind of full circle again.
I did have something like that. It was called Parents.
I'd like to try and think of, and again, because I don't think we should just copy and paste freaking Chinese policy onto the US. We are not China. We have very different everything from them, and the people would not accept. That's another part of it. Anything you're trying to like force onto people, probably not. You're probably off the mark. Whatever change we come up with must be like of the people. You go to the people and ask, hey, what's going on? What's an issue we could work on? And then that becomes like a long, continuous process of actually getting down to what people need. But it's like, if we have the option between just hope every parent not only has like the wherewithal to do it, the ability to do it, like if your parents don't even know what freaking video games are, they aren't going to be very effective at like parenting you, and that they're home enough to even monitor your behavior. Or you go the just full blanket thing of, all right, you're under 16, you can't drive a car, sorry. Oh, but my parents really taught me how to... No.
Are you talking about socialism with American characteristics?
It's what you must have if there will be socialism in America. Is it be. Otherwise, it's not. It's quote socialism. It's like British style socialism, because you can argue that we live under democratic socialism right now. We have fucking Medicaid, kinda. We have food stamps.
Yeah, technically, yes, there are a few programs that could very easily be defined as socialist things. There is a little bit of a safety net in the sense of food stamps. There's also ways that you can or can't qualify for some of those things. We do have some medical aid for poor under a certain amount of income.
As long as you have one class handing down goodies to another class, like a permissive mode, the change has not occurred. We need a situation where it's not like the idea of, oh, you're not sufficiently, I don't know, poor enough or can't prove yourself to be poor, you have the wrong citizenship category or in the wrong county or the wrong state, like all that nonsense. It's ways to not, kind of, I don't think it's explicitly to lord power over us, but it ends up being a mechanism of such, where you get the poors to fight with each other. It's a whole, freaking that asshole has Medicaid, and I'm over here, I don't get Medicaid, or that asshole has food stamps or SNAP cards, and I got nothing. And it keeps you from finding solidarity. It keeps you from having any kind of power or time to like organize and actually form some kind of resistance to this really extortion of the working class. And yet another example of where the elimination of class needs to be such a goal, and I'm so glad that was brought up by not me.
Are you saying that trickle-down charity is not a good model?
It's what charity nonsense is trickle-down for, quote, liberals, quote, left-wing people. It's like, oh, just give money to this thing. Give money to a strike fund. That'd be freaking awesome. That'd be investing power in the strikers to continue their strike. Yeah. But anytime you're thinking of I don't even give money to charities anymore. I just I find people I just give money directly to people whenever I possibly can. Because you don't have to wait for, geez, you give a donation of $20 to, I don't know, like the ACLU or whoever, and then they spend $50 mailing you, asking you for more money. Like, yeah, use it.
I will say, like, my grandparents do a charity thing every year, and it's like the St. Jude's Hospital. And they never get any mail, and when I was living with them, they never got any mail of like asking for more money. They'd always get thank you cards from the hospital because they gave money.
St. Jude sends us the big sticker sheet of return address labels, and then ask you to pay for them. Like, they'll send you a big pack of them, which obviously uses resources, and then I mean, I guess not everybody gets them, but that's what we would get. And I am in no way saying negative things about St. Jude's specifically. My sister was helped by them when she was like she needed some medical procedures that there was no earthly way we were going to be able to afford as our broke family. So like, as a specific thing, yeah, like charities do help people. It's just a less efficient way of going about it than if there was just a healthcare system where my child sister could have just gotten the medical procedures she needed.
I was gonna say, to be honest, that is literally the only charity that I've ever really grown up knowing or anything like that.
Everybody has good stuff to say about them, right?
Well, like I said, that's the only charity I ever grew up knowing, and that's the only, like, when I was living with them, like, I was the one who had to go get the mail, and I'd be like, hey, there's a thing from, you know, that hospital that you send money to sometimes, and it's like, oh, we'll open it, and like, I'd open it, and it'd just be, oh, it's just a thank you for sending money. That's all I ever saw, so I didn't know anything about the sticker thing or return stickers.
Yeah, we've gotten those for a while. I think I got one at my new address, not just to my parents' house. It's not even necessarily relevant, but it is interesting that like St. Jude has very strong connections to the Masons. The Shriners help do a lot of fundraisers for them, which doesn't mean I think they're like evil or something. It's just interesting, because when people talk about the Masons and the what is it, like Illuminati, it's like, no, the Masons are a real organization that really do have branches and chapters in every single city in the U.S.
Yeah.
That's another fun thing that was sort of being touched upon there. What you're basically saying there, Pepper, is that if we were in a system where charity wasn't the automatic fallback on everything that couldn't be taken care of, like if we had a system that worked and everybody had that kind of healthcare access, or not even access, but the ability to get it, then you wouldn't need stuff like charity to make up that gap. Because technically, yeah, we all have access to healthcare, just as much as we all have access to yachts and shit. We just may not have the money for those things. I could have myself a private jet tomorrow if I could only find the money for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, don't know what you do with it once you got it.
All right, my friends, we're coming up on almost 2 hours here.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
This is a big one. Yeah, I think we might want to
apologize.
say, yeah, we'll call this episode here. This was a nice long talk.
But I could just spin out these, much like how I describe myself as a very enthusiastic, like, hobbyist of the science of socialism. I have so much enthusiasm for these subjects, for these concepts, and my hope is always that I'm not just blowing people down. And because I've had conversations where somebody just starts talking about, like, I don't know, particle physics or actually electricity itself, and I just, like, my eyes glaze over and I'm like, what the fuck are we even talking about? And I hope I don't become that guy, but there's so much to talk about.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
You know, I do my best to not derail as much as possible.
Yeah, like, this originally started as, like, an idea to basically just get some of the definitions out there and potentially, like, pill my wife a little bit on socialism, but we ended up just having, like, an almost 2-hour conversation about stuff and how it relates to socialism, and I think that's a lot more of an effective aid to explaining what it is than just some definitions and reading a lot of the books is, like, how something like that could be effective.
Socialism is a change in owner relations where instead of the bourgeois subjugating the working class, like everybody else who actually works for them and makes the stuff, it would be the opposite. Socialism is where the working class, or the 99% of humanity, subjugates the owning class until eventually class is just eliminated. Because remember, if you're proletarian, if you're a worker and you lose at capitalism, you kind of die usually, or you end up in prison or on the street, and then you die later. If you're bourgeois and you lose at capitalism, you just become proletarian, which is fine. That's what we are. It's not that horrible of a fate where, oh, you're being so cruel to the bourgeois. It's like, no, I just want them to be regular people who have to, like, work for a living.
Pepper, you have a podcast, don't you?
I do. If you want to listen to more of me talking, Last Minute Politics. Look up on whatever podcasting service you use. Last Minute Politics. And then look up Pepper Coyote for music that is not horribly political. Or at least on the surface, I'd say it's very ideological, but you have to know my internal meaning of some of my songs.
You can actually, if you're a member of the Last Minute Politics Patreon, every other Sunday, Pepper does a little segment called Bible Study, where he goes into a little bit about the actual sacred Jedi texts of socialism.
We read some actual Marx or Lenin or William Z. Foster. We're about to do my new favorite intro to socialism, not the Communist Manifesto necessarily. There's a lot of stuff in that kind of requires that's more about, like, where exactly Germany was in the the late 1800s. But we're going to read Karl Marx by Lenin, an article that Lenin wrote about Marx and Marxism for an encyclopedia. So it's meant to be all right, everybody, here's who this guy was and here's what his big ideas are.
It's kind of fun just how much of an influence that Germany has had on politics as a whole, when you think about it.
Yeah, you got German philosophy mixed with French Enlightenment ideas, and boom, Marxism.
All right. So for the Kind of Fruity podcast, I am Misfit.
I'm Brenna.
And I've been Pepper Coyote.
You can find Brenna over on Twitch TV/Brenna MSM for her game streams. You can find us basically wherever you get podcasts, or hit us up on kindofruity.podbean.com, or check us out on YouTube at Kind of Fruity. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
And if you happen to be listening to this at night, well, have a good night, sleep tight, and don't let the bugs bite.
Have a good one.